At the start of each year, there's usually a World Economic Forum that is held in Switzerland, in Davos. And South Africa participates there, and it's been participating for a number of years. But this year, 2026, I've noticed online a number of people asking whether South Africa was well received there and what message did South Africa carry forward in this. And others, they've gone on X as far as saying South Africa's message was not well received, and perhaps maybe it was not a good use of time to go to Davos this year and participate in the World Economic Forum. And I thought perhaps here on AgriView I could speak on this because I was part of the South African delegation that went to the World Economic Forum in Switzerland this year, 2026. And I'll say this, South Africa had a solid message that we put forward in there. And remember, South Africa's participation this year comes on the backdrop of already an excellent G20 that I think it was a success. Of course, not all members attended. The United States did not attend. But if you look at the communique and the leaders' declaration that came out of South Africa, it carried forward some solid messages. And in fact, some of those for the agricultural sector, we even highlighted here on AgriView where we were talking about their commitments to utilizing science to boost agricultural productivity and ensure that we deal with the problems of hunger as the world, and the emphasis on Africa. And alongside that, there were other streams that were focusing on the financial services, manufacturing, trade, and a whole range of other aspects that were carried out in the leaders' declaration. And I think that anyone who observed closely how South Africa participated or hosted the G20 would probably agree that it was pretty much a success. We were all very proud on social media, tweeting our hearts as well as the South African flag, proud of the success that we were able to put out there in the world. So on the backdrop of that, you can imagine then the attention and the focus that is on South Africa. And when we went there this year around, we also not only carried or leaning on the success of the G20, but we were there to promote the opportunities that are in South Africa. And at a high level, the message really that the South African leaders, business and government, carried forward on this was the fact that the country has actually progressed from the difficulties of some few years ago. We all remember when we were hit by load shedding. And in fact, those of us that are in agriculture, it was quite a difficult thing because remember, all of South Africa's fruits, vegetables, 20% of our sugar cane, roughly 10 to 15% of our maize and the other products are under irrigation. So when we were hit by load shedding, it was not just a national thing, but farmers themselves and their own businesses were feeling this. Agribusinesses that are manufacturing were feeling the impact of this. Either you are in poultry or others, you are feeling the impact of this. But we've now far gone and progressed from that difficulty. We are, to an extent, stable on the power supply. And of course, the fact that South Africa now has some relatively stable power supply is not just only the efforts of an Eskom or a government, it's also private sector in the households that have actually invested a lot on renewables, but also the improvements that have been made by Eskom and the others. So communicating that message was an important aspect, but also a number of reforms that are under Operation Vulindlela. Either it's the issues at the ports, issues in the water, and really across all of our logistics industries. And of course, I know that in the start of January, there were headlines in the Business Day and the other newspapers about the difficulties in the Port of Cape Town. But the issues of the Port of Cape Town were not only the fact that there wasn't investments that are there, it was the need for a few improvement on making sure that the ports runs fairly well, but investment have gone into some of these ports and others are performing far better. And again, I will center it back as an example to agriculture and say, if you look at the agricultural exports in the first 3 quarters of 2025, they were at $11.7 billion, up 10%. But it was not just the value. The volumes also were solid. That we achieved because the Port of Durban, Eastern Cape, they were doing reasonably well. So the efficiencies are there, and there's a number of reforms that South Africa is making. But also improvement on the credit rating side, where South Africa received some bit of an upgrade. We're getting out of the grey listing. So all of those things were the macro pictures of some of the key improvements that we are seeing in South Africa. And remember, the South African delegation also is not just the government. It is the government that leads others, but also you have the business, you have the academia, you have a whole range of other stakeholders that gets to be involved and represent and promote Team South Africa in there. And of course, when you arrive at these conferences, there are a whole range of things. You get to attend and listen to some of the key global thinkers on various subjects, and you can participate in a range of these topics in there and listen and glean those insights, which you can use in your thinking and your work in South Africa when you return from there. But beyond that, there's also an opportunity to have bilaterals, business to business, but also government to government in some of these engagements and resolve whatever some of the issues. You can think of it as almost a meeting place for the government as well as those that are leading key businesses. And that's the opportunity that South Africa had to be in, because in talking about the improvements we have made, we are also in a space whereby we are, as a country now, thinking about how can we get more investments in South Africa. And getting that investment in South Africa entails then being in these global forums and talking about the positives in the country, but also highlighting the areas in our country that have opportunities for growth, that require investments, and all of those things, so that the other governments and the other business leaders, they can begin to see South Africa in that light and not think about some of the things only that they had read, which had happened a year ago, where we have actually made improvements on. So that's the other thing that we got an opportunity to be able to put forward and interact with many people. And I will say this, as someone who was there, I can tell you there was a lot of interest on South Africa. We're not just talking amongst ourselves. We were inundated with various meetings on a number of countries and a number of businesses wanting to hear more from South Africa. Because regardless of what we can think, as we're sitting here and sometimes overwhelmed by our own problems, the world out there still views us with that level of really upliftment in a country that is amongst the middle powers in the world. And I think that when people see South Africa, they see one of the middle powers, they see one of the countries that is important in the African continent, but also really amongst the emerging markets and the global economy side. And I think that's the perspective at which people were viewing South Africa when you're there. But I will say this also, remember, and a number of industries, especially us in agriculture that are here. Because you can say, okay, that happens at a business level, but how does it link to agriculture? On an agricultural perspective, there's also two things we have to always remember. The South African agricultural sector is interlinked to the global market in a number of ways. One, in terms of inputs that we get to get. When you are there, you can interact now with some of the global suppliers, and I will mention them here by names on this segment. Organizations like Corteva, Syngenta, Bayer, Deere, and many others that provide inputs like Case, and many others that provide inputs into agricultural sector in South Africa. And there's many others that I didn't mention that are also as key to South Africa. When you are there, you can interact with some of their global leaders, hear what they are doing in South America, hear what they are doing in Asia, and assess if those are the technologies and the investments that they should be making in South Africa, bringing that technology to the South African farmers. You get to have that close conversation, which then when you return to the country, you can talk to the local office and connect and link on that. There is that one aspect. The other aspect at which we are interlinked to the world as agriculture is through the exports. So it's a one thing that we are doing, visiting the other countries and making sure that we are visible, talking about the trade agreement. But it's another thing when you meet with the foreign ministers, with the trade ministers and the others, and making sure that you cement those relationships. Then as we go in our economic diplomacy, as business and government, as Team South Africa, and thinking about expanding the export markets, there's already all of these relationships that we have grown at and we have cultivated. Because our sector is where it is today, largely because of how much improvements we have made in our exports. In the early 2000s, South Africa was exporting about $2 billion of agricultural products. And I would say when we received the 2025 data of exports, we probably crossed for the first time the $14 billion of agriculture exports. And you know that in 2024, we had our agriculture export at $13.7 billion. So maintaining then that global presence and thinking of the fact that we want to expand our exports and we want to gain the new inputs. And remember, the world is now changing. We are in the space where there is all of this friction in trade. The leadership in the US has made sure that they increase the tariffs and they're changing some other things in the global trading system. But that also has brought opportunities for many countries to review their trade policy strategies and say, where should I be looking? Which markets should I be opening? And I think that when you are sitting in places like the World Economic Forum, there are also those sideline conversations that you get to have. But also then insights as to how people are thinking about the geopolitics, how people are thinking about technology, what are they seeing as areas of growth in their economies. So there are all of those networking, learning, and many opportunities that come in there. But I think the key point that I want to say is that agriculture, as much as we are a rural part of the economy, when you are thinking about the World Economic Forum, we remain still part and parcel of these conversations, and we have to be there because we trade, we buy inputs from other parts of the world, we contribute to stability of the world through food security. So we have to be part and parcel of these conversations, climate change and all of these big themes that gets to be discussed. And most importantly, South Africa is still highly regarded by a number of countries. And certainly in 2026, we were not ignored. We did engage and engage deeply with a number of countries. And I think what is left now is, of course, to say all of those insights that we learned, relationships that we are continuing building, and conversations that we had with many countries, how do we take that go to various departments and various businesses and make sure that there's a follow-up work that gets to be done so that we actually harvest something from all of these relationships that we keep cultivating as a country. So participating in these global forums is actually very important. And some of you probably saw that the 2027 spring meeting of the World Economic Forum will actually be in South Africa. That again speaks to the confidence that other global leaders place in our great country. Thanks for listening.